the first few sessions, starting this week, we have been talking about clustering. We saw that there are two main categories of machine learning. One is the supervised learning, and the second is unsupervised learning. In supervised learning, we are given data which is having the form of X and Y. It means that we have the features available and we also have the corresponding labels or the corresponding target names or the corresponding Y values available. And what we do in the supervised learning is to find out a function which will map the X values, that is the features, to the Y values, that is the labels. We have done this in regression. We have done this in classification, where certain data about the examples that we have taken, data about different houses were given. And we were also given what was the value of the house. And in that regression problem, we were trying to predict that based on the given features of the house, what the price of the house should be. And the regression algorithms, they were finding out a relationship or the different weightages which should be assigned to the features. And based on those weightages, we were finding out what the price would be. Similar was the process we followed for classification, where we did an experimentation with classification of the given handwritten digits. And based on the pixel data that we had, and we had information about 784 pixel as the image was 28 by 28 image. Given those pixels, we were identifying what that digit would be. And there also the process was the same, because we have been given certain pixel data and we have been given the information in the data set that what that pixel represented, whether that was digit 0 or 1 or any of the digits from 0 to 9. So there also the classification algorithms were coming out with a mapping that if the pattern of distribution of the digits falls into this pattern, then it would be 5. If falls into a given pattern, then it would be 7. And whether it was actually 5 or 7, that information was given to us in the form of the information about the target or Y. So there, what the algorithms were learning was a function which will map X to Y. Now there could be several other classes of problem where we have no information about the levels of the targets. We have no information about the Y as such. And if that kind of data is given to us, we are exploring at this point in time that what could be done with that kind of data. And in today's world, more and more, the data is being generated by the sensors, or data is coming from the usage of a mobile app or a website, where labeling is very difficult. It means that no human intervention would be possible at the scale that we are operating today for someone to sit and say that if this is the action, this is what the label should be. For example, in the e-commerce websites, if you want to find out a pattern, or if you want to generate a data set where we say that if this is the pattern, then this person is likely to buy a trouser or a shoe, it's going to be extremely difficult. So we also have to see that if I have only data, then what things can be done. And clustering is one of those things that we started this week. So we'll quickly go through what do we do in clustering. So in clustering, we identify the distinct groups in the data which is present. Now we don't have the information about the labels or the y-axis, but still we can find out if there are common patterns available in the data. And that is what clustering is all about. Then the next question is that how do we really group different observations into a given data set or into a given type of cluster? And then we saw that the main tool that we'll use will be the distance between one observation and the other. So if we find out a measure of distance between one observation or the other, then we might be able to group them into cohesive clusters by saying that if there are observations which are close to each other, we can group them into one cluster, and the other group of observations which are closer to each other but farther from the other set of data, that could form another cluster. So what that measure could be, what that measure of similarity or measure of distance could be, that we will see. But if we have certain measure, whatever that measure be, which will give me a distance between one observation or the other, then it is possible for us to identify that which are the observations which are closer to each other and which are the observations which are closer to one another but farther from the other set of observations. That's how the clustering can be done. And the most popular method are the k-means clustering and the hierarchical clustering. Then we saw that in the k-means clustering, the measure of distance is the Euclidean distance between two different data points. Euclidean distance we have discussed even earlier in the context of classification, where the k neighbor classifier, it was computing the distance between different data points, and then we were finding out whether it should be falling into one class or the other. So here also we will compute the Euclidean distance, although there are other measures of distances also available, and Euclidean distance will take the difference between two different observations on the labels that we have. So we have the information about available about level x1, x2, x3, x4 up to xn. So if I have two different observations, we will see the difference on each dimension or different on each difference in the data of each feature. Then we'll take a square of that, sum that, and take a square root. That's the Euclidean distance between two different observations. So once we have the measure of the Euclidean distance, then we can do the clustering. And here I would like you to take again through how the system does the clustering. So suppose these are the 16 different data points which is given to us. Initially, all of them are say of the same color. And the assignment given to us is that group these into two different, create two different clusters out of the data which has been given to us. So what we do, we take any two points from the observation as the center of the two clusters. So we have been given 16 points. Our job is to divide them into two different clusters. So if, as a first step, we identify any 2 points, randomly chosen 2 points, as the center of the cluster. And for better identification, we will give them a different color. Here we are giving them a color red and blue. So we identify two different points, randomly chosen points, as the center of the cluster. Then we say that if these are the center of the cluster, let's see that which points in which are the observations or which are the dots on the screen that we have here would fall into the red cluster and which points would fall into the blue cluster. So if these 2 points, as you're seeing on the screen, are the centers, then the points closer to the center, we will give them a color red or blue, depending upon the distance between the points and the center, or the centroid as we call it, between these randomly chosen centroids and the other points. So as we see that if these 2 points are chosen as the centroids, then these are the 3 points which are closer to this centroid or the red centroid, and rest of the points are closer to the blue centroid. And therefore, in the first iteration, we say that there are 2 clusters, and red cluster has 4 dots, and 12 dots are belonging to the blue cluster. Having done that operation, now we put the or we reverse the question and say that now that we have 2 different clusters, one is blue and one is the red, what should be the center of this cluster? So first we said that if these 2 points are the centroids, which are the observations which should belong to the red cluster or the blue cluster? Having taken that step, now we say that if these are the 4 points belonging to the red cluster and these are the 12 points belonging to the blue cluster, what should be the center of this cluster or the centroid of this cluster? So then we find a point which will be center of the blue cluster and the center of the red cluster. In this case, that is what we come to the next diagram, which is titled as after round one. And then we move the clusters here. So for the red ones, out of these 4 elements, the centroid remains the same, but the centroid of the blue cluster moves from this point to this point because this point is more central to these 12 different observations which form the blue cluster. Now we ask the same question. Now that the centroids have moved, we ask this question again, that if these two are the new centroids of the red cluster and the blue cluster, which are the observations which should belong to the red cluster and which are the observations which should belong to the blue cluster? If we do that, then we see that some of the points now move away from the blue cluster to the red cluster. Because now, having moved the centroid, these points are now closer to the red cluster compared to the centroid of the blue cluster. And then now we see that 3 and 3, 6, and to 8 items have come into the red cluster compared to the 4 earlier, and the remaining 10 items belong to the blue cluster. Now we repeat this process and we say that, okay, now that we have the new clusters, what should be the centroid? And then we see that the centroid of the red cluster moves from this point to this point, and centroid of the blue cluster moves from this point to this point. Then we ask the question again that if these are the new centroids, which are the observations which should belong to the red cluster and the blue cluster? And then we move to this stage. And after this, neither the centroids move nor the observations move from one cluster to the other. So they become stable in nature. And that's the final output. This is what the clustering model or the k-means model will do in the backend. We also saw that since in the first iteration we are choosing the centroids randomly, because of the random selection, our centroids may differ. And therefore, in the backend, by default, it will create 10 different clusters, and whichever is the most cohesive cluster, that is what the output this k-means algorithm gives. I hope it is clear to you, Jivna. That is how the clustering is happening in the backend.
It's clear.
Okay. Now that we have understood what is the concept, then we go to the actual logic of doing that, and we'll see that um, when we are using the k-means logic, or when we are coding with the k-means logic, one of the things that we need to define in the algorithm itself is how many clusters we want the uh, algorithm to divide the data set into. And that's where the question arises, that if we are telling the model that you divide the data into two clusters or three clusters or four clusters, how do we really know that the best clustering would be when we divide the data set into two or three or four? So we are using certain techniques, which was called the elbow technique and the silhouette method. These were the two techniques we were using to identify that how many clusters we should divide our data into. And therefore, we needed certain metrics or certain measures which will tell us that whether the clustering has been done well or not. So, apart from knowing that what are the different methods of clustering, just as we had done in the case of regression and classification, we also need to have certain measures of defining that whether the clustering has been done well or not. So those are the performance measures for the clustering. So we had used R square and RMSE, root mean square error, in the case of regression. We had used the performance metrics like accuracy, F1 score, precision, recall. These are the things we had used to assess whether the accuracy, how well the classification has been done. Similarly, we'll see two different measures to assess whether clustering has been done well or not. And these two are the silhouette score and the inertia. So, what does inertia mean, and how do we compute inertia? Inertia is the mean square distance. So, if you see, inertia is the mean square distance of each instance in the cluster from the centroid. So in the previous example, we had divided our data set into two different clusters, the red cluster and the blue cluster, and each of them had their own centroid. Now, we will find the Euclidean distance between the center and each of the observations in that cluster. So for the red cluster, we'll take the centroid of the red cluster and calculate the distance between the centroid and every other observation that we have in that cluster. So we'll get some number. Similarly, the same operation we'll do on the blue cluster, and we will have some number. And then we'll take the average that we receive for the cluster 1 and cluster 2, and we'll take the average. That's the inertia. So it basically says that, how closely your cluster has been formed. So closer the cluster, better it is. And therefore, closer the cluster, the lower the inertia is bound to be, because inertia is nothing but the distance measure between the centroid and the elements in that given cluster, or the observations belonging to that given cluster. But the problem we saw is that inertia will, because of this method of computation, the inertia will continue to fall as we have more and more clusters. So if we ask the algorithm to divide our data set only into two clusters, obviously the data around the clusters will be more widespread compared to when we say that divide the data into four different clusters. Because the moment we say that four different clusters, the clusters are bound to be smaller, and therefore inertia continues to fall as we increase the number of clusters. So that's where we will see, and we will revisit that how the elbow method helps you identify how many number of clusters is actually the best one, because the we can't take the minimum or of the inertia, as the inertia keeps falling as we have more and more number of clusters. The second measure of cluster or the performance of the cluster is yeah, the second measure of the cluster is the silhouette method, where we say that we should go beyond just seeing the distance between the centroid of the cluster and the elements of the cluster, but we'll go one step further and see that what is the distance between the observations belonging to one cluster and the observations belonging to the closest cluster to that one. So if we have, say, four different clusters, for each cluster, there would be another cluster which will be nearest. So we'll not just find out the distance between the observations of a given cluster, but also if that is forming one cluster, then the observations should be closer to each other in a given cluster compared to the observations which belong to another cluster. So we'll also measure the distance between the observations belonging to one cluster and the observations belonging to another cluster. And that we will call as, say, let's call that as B. That distance measure will be B. And the distance measure between the observations belonging to the same cluster, we'll call that A. So obviously, the B should be larger than A. So if the classification, so if the identification of the cluster has been done properly, then the measure B should be larger than the measure A, because B is measuring the distance between the observations of one cluster with another cluster. And A is measuring the distance between the observations of the same cluster. So in the silhouette coefficient, we take two different things. One is B and the second is A. And then we divide the B minus A by the maximum of A or B. That is the silhouette measure. So in the, while we take only uh, the data belonging to the same cluster when we calculate inertia, we also take into account the distance between the elements of one cluster to the other when we calculate the silhouette method. And because of that, the silhouette method would end up giving us more information about whether the clustering has been done well or not. Okay. So having understood that, we'll now go to the application. We'll go to the notebook, try to run the algorithm, and then we'll see that how we can use these measures to identify or say that whether the clustering has been done well or not. So as usual, we'll import the libraries, then we'll get the data. We are working with the mall data set here. This is the kind of information which has been given to us: the customer ID, the gender, the age, annual income, and spending score. And we are trying to find out if there is a possibility of creating different clusters out of the total customer base that the mall has got. And the business case would be that can I run different types of marketing campaign for these different groups of the users. So given that business objective and given the data that we have, we get this data set. We are just renaming here in the first step. We are just renaming the columns because this column have spaces and brackets and all that. So we are just renaming so that it becomes easier to use later on, nothing else. Then we see that the gender as a feature is non-numeric. It is given in the form of male and female. So we have to do encoding for this, either the label encoding or the one-hot encoding. And since here this is a nominal data, not really showing any hierarchy, we will do the one-hot encoding. And as we do the one-hot encoding and remove the gender as a column, then we get ID, age, income, spending score, and two columns for gender, which is the gender male and gender female. So now we have done the one-hot encoding. After that, we are doing the scaling. That is, we are putting all the data points into between 0 and 1. So we are doing the min-max scaling. And we are also dropping ID because ID is not really which can give us any insight because the ID would have been assigned randomly. So ID as an attribute is not going to help us identify any pattern. So we are removing the ID from the data set. Having removed that, now we have the data available. We can do different types of plottings as we have done earlier. We can do the pair plots and see whether we are seeing any correlation or not. But we'll skip that stage and we will directly go to running the clustering. So here also the process remains the same. K-means is the name of the model that we import and create an instance of that. But as you are saying that giving the number of clusters is actually a must when you call the K-means clustering. So we are calling the K-means clustering and we are saying that we are initializing that with 4 different clusters. It means that when we train the model, it will create 4 different clusters from the data set that we have. So we created the instance of that. Then we are training that, and for training, we are calling the fit function. As you can see here, that only x is being given as a parameter to the fit function, whereas in the case of regression and classification, we are giving both x and y. Since now we don't have the y available, we can only give x. Also, we have skipped the step of splitting the x and y data set into train and test because anyway we don't have the y data set. And the very purpose of splitting the data into train and test was that after training, we will test that how accurate my regression or classification has been. Uh, and that comparison was being done with Y. So we were making some prediction and we were getting the value of that prediction. We were comparing that prediction with the actual Y value. But since we don't have the actual Y value, even that comparison would not be possible, and therefore the train test split, even that step is not required in the case of classification. So let's create the instance and train the model. So model has been trained. Now we are getting the predictions, and these predictions we are getting by calling the labels function on the model instance. So once we call labels, now the very purpose was to create 4 different clusters. That is what we have done here. So we are asking the algorithm, we are asking this K-means model to create 4 different clusters. So it will create 4 different clusters, and each observation would be given either the level 0 or 1 or 2 or 3. So since we are asking the model to create 4 different clusters, it will create 0, 1, 2, 3. That is how the each cluster would be named. And that's what we will get in the model.labels. So we are getting these levels, and if we want to see these levels, this is how now it looks like. So the observation one that we have, or record one that we have, it has been classified as belonging to the cluster 0. Observation 2 is belonging to cluster number 3, and so on. So now I have got the cluster ID, which the k-means algorithm has generated, and we would be able to see that which observation belongs to which cluster. That is what we had done yesterday. And if you want to see it side by side, so we have got the X here, we have the labels. Okay, so X is, we have not converted X into, so X is not a data frame here. We can convert that and we can get the, so I'll skip that step. And then we can see that, okay, we'll just do that right away so that we are able to see that. Just give me one. I'm just trying to find out what is the names of the columns we are given. So it is new columns. I think if we just run this one, we should be fine. Now I think we should be fine. So you can put them side by side and we'll see what is the column. So here, for each of these records, we can get what the cluster ID has been given by the system. And we see that if we divide this into 4 clusters, 57 records have been given the ID as 1, 55 records have been given ID as 3, 48 records have the ID of 2, and so on. So now the system has given a cluster ID for each of these records. And then we also compute the inertia of this model. It means that the difference between the centroid of each of these in each of these clusters and the observations which belong to that cluster, the average of that is given here. So we have seen how to create different clusters, but the objective was to really say that whether we should have 3 clusters or 4 clusters, that is not being given by the model itself. So what we do is that we run the same exercise with different number of clusters, and that we are doing through this function. We are doing the operations iteratively for with different number of clusters, and we will get the our performance metrics, that is the inertia value and the silhouette score value, and then we'll compare and we'll see that whether the best number of clusters would be 3 or 4 or 5. So we run the k-means clustering uh, for starting from 2 up to 10 different number of clusters, and we will get the inertia value. So we are running this on the mol data set, and after that we are saying give me the inertia values, and this is what we get. So if we create only 2 clusters out of this, my inertia value is 37. If you create 3 clusters, inertia comes down to 29, and you are able to see the pattern that as we increase the number of clusters, the value of inertia comes down. And that is bound to happen because the more number of clusters we create, the distance between the clusters will become more cohesive, and therefore the distance between the centroid of the cluster and the observations inside that cluster will become smaller and smaller. So just by seeing this, it has not really helped us, because we are trying to find out that how many number of clusters is actually giving me the best result. And therefore, what we do is that we draw a chart of this one, and then we use the elbow method, where we say that wherever in drawing this, it is forming a shape of an elbow. At whatever points we get the elbow shape, that is the point that we'll choose as the best number of clusters to have. And what is the rationale here? Because anyway, given the logic of the computation of inertia, it will continue to fall. But can we identify a point where the fall before that is very sharp, and the fall in inertia after that is not that sharp? That is the basic idea behind choosing the elbow point. And here we can see that this point visually looks like forming the elbow, because before that the fall in inertia is sharper compared to the fall in inertia after that point, and therefore 4 appears to be the most appropriate number of clusters to have. So that's the way that we analyze that how many number of clusters would be the most appropriate to have. So we run the uh, algorithms to find out the inertia at different numbers of clusters. Then we draw or we plot that number, and we try to look for an elbow formation, and that's possibly the best number of clusters that we should have. That's the way that we can find out the best number of clusters using um, inertia. But at the same time, you can also compute Silver's score. So we are computing the Silver's score here, and we can plot that also. And that plot we can do in 2 different ways, and we'll see that whether that helps us in computing the or finding out how many clusters we should have. So here we plot the Silver's score, and Silver's score, if you find that there is a point up to which the silhouette value is falling, and after that, if you see, it starts rising. And therefore, visually, we see that 4 is the best number of clusters to have, because until then, the score falls, and after that, the score rises. But if you are not seeing that kind of pattern, then in most of the cases, you will find an elbow when you score when you plot the inertia. But you may not find this kind of pattern when you plot silhouette score all the time. Here it is very clear. And we also see that there is the same number of cluster is being shown as the best number to have. Either we see the inertia or we see the silhouette score, and therefore 4 is very obvious choice here. But there is a much better way to plot the silhouette score, and that's what we are doing here. So once we plot the silhouette score, it gives the plot comes like this, as you are seeing on the screen. And yesterday we also saw that how to read this plot. So if we are creating only two clusters, we will get only two blocks here. So three things to notice here. First is that are these different clusters of similar size? So symmetry between the blocks, that gives us the feeling that whether the cluster, the number of elements in the cluster, whether they are similar or not. The second one is that whether it tapers off, all these blocks will taper off towards the end, and whether the end of these is crossing this horizontal line or not. So if they're crossing the horizontal line, it means that the clustering is well and has been done well. And if it is not, then that means that clustering is not really that good. And the third thing to notice is that on the x-axis, if you're seeing here, there are some positive numbers and there could be some negative numbers. So if certain observations are going into the negative territory, it means that there is some misclassification. And that would happen if you see the formula of the Silhouette score, it was B minus A divided by the max of A and B. So if A becomes larger than B, or if B is smaller than A, then these numbers will become negative. And what does it mean? It means that there are certain elements in the cluster which are closer to the other cluster compared to the elements of its own cluster. That means there are actually misclassification happening. So if that happens, there would be a few things which would go into the negative territory. So these are the three things to be seen, based on which we'll judge whether we should go for two clusters or three clusters or nine clusters. So here, these two blocks are looking very symmetrical. Then we come to the plot when we have three different clusters. And here we say that 3 is not really a good number to have, because first of all, these blocks are not of the similar size, or the three clusters are not of the similar size. The symmetry is not there. One cluster is much larger compared to the other two. And at the same time, there is one cluster which is not even reaching that vertical line. And therefore, we say that 3 is not really a good cluster to have. When we come to 4, we see that all 4 are more or less symmetrical distribution, and all 4 are crossing this vertical line. It means that all 4 clusters have been done well. And there is only a very small number of maybe just 2 or 3 records which have been misclassified, and that too falls into a single cluster of cluster 1. So there are a few things which is going into the negative territory. So four clusters appear to be a good number to have. So 2 was good, 4 is good. 5 again, it suffers from the problem of symmetry between the beta elements. 6 also, there are the cluster number 5 is actually very small. Cluster number 2 is very large compared to cluster number 5. And also there are lot many more misclassification happening. So we'll choose 4 above 5. Similarly, the same is the case with 6 and 7 and so on. So then the choice comes down to whether we go for 2 or we go for 4. So 2 could be a very small number because we are just dividing into 2 sets. So in this case also possibly we'll choose number 4. So from all indications, it says that if we are working with the mall data set, the best thing is to work with 4 clusters in that given data set. Now, as it is very obvious that if we are working with another data set, possibly it could say that 3 is a good number or 5 is a good number. But in this data set, using the Silhouette plot and using the elbow method on the inertia, we say that this data set, we will have 4 different clusters. And that's the number that will go back to our marketing team and say that after analyzing the data of the visitors to the mall and given the information about their age, the gender, the income, and the spending score. These are the four different dimensions on which you have given us the data about each of the mall visitor. And we feel that they should be divided into four different clusters. Now, what these clusters are, now that we know that uh, the number should be 4, and therefore we can run the algorithm again with 4 cluster, and we will put the label alongside the original data. So we are taking the mall data set, which was our original data, and all the labels that we have, we'll put that side by side. We can give the names to the labels here. Otherwise, it will come as 0 and 1. So maybe if we suppress that step, it will come as 0 and 1. Then we see this new data where I have the original data. We'll avoid giving the name first. We'll just see the original data. So now we concat the results that we get alongside the original data. And this is what we can present to our marketing team and say that for each of these observations, this is what the ideal clustering should be. So the system has given some cluster ID. Now we can consult the marketing team and say that, okay, what is the name that you want to give to the cluster? And for that, if you want to filter out and see it one by one, that what they comprise of, and then we can give an appropriate name here. So if you want to see the cluster 0, see here we have not given the name here. See, the name we have given is cluster. So now we will be able to go into more detail and say that the first cluster is actually looks like them, all of them are female. Yeah, so all of them. So they see the system has created these 4 clusters, and it's saying that in one cluster it's all the female customers, and maybe their spending score appears to be low. So it's the females who are spending less. So that kind of information would be visible now that the clustering has been done based on which parameters. And then we could give an appropriate name to the cluster. So we could give a name of A, B, C, D, or whatever. So that's how we have done the clustering exercise. Now the other thing which is important to see is that the power of the clustering. So in the supervised learning, we had the labels available. It means that that information was either available in the data set the way it was collected, or it was manually labeled by someone after seeing this data. And we also discussed that in most of the cases, the labeling may not be possible, and therefore we have to work with the unlabeled data where we may have only value of X available. And the different types of algorithms that we can do is one is the clustering. The other one is the, for frequently we will use that what is called as the dimensionality reduction. It means that if we have, say, a very large number of features available in the data set, we can reduce the um number of features, and there are certain methods we will discuss tomorrow. And that also falls into the unsupervised learning, because dimensionality reduction also, we don't need to have the labels, we don't need to have the y value. Based on the correlation and the other types of relationship between different features, we will be able to say that whether we want to have all the features or we can reduce those features without really affecting the performance of the algorithm. So two main things that we will use was the principal component analysis and TSNE that we'll discuss tomorrow. Basically, what it says is that, as we have seen in the some of the earlier cases where we were seeing that there is a very high correlation between the total number of rooms and the total number of bedrooms. So the question is that, is the other feature really adding any information to us or not? So if the correlation is very high, then we know that the uh, information being given to us by the new feature is not really very high, so one could be eliminated. Similarly, the principal component analysis, it does try to find out the linear relationship between different features, and then it can either create a new feature by itself, or it can drop another feature. So that's what is done by the principal component analysis. But the point we're trying to make here is that we can do different types of algorithms even if we don't have the levels available. And nowadays, one of the most frequently used um case is generation of the new types of images or new types of videos. So if we have been given the images of human faces, or if we have been given the images of the streets, the system is able to now generate the same kind of images for a street or a building or a cat or a dog. And that's the generative modeling, which also does not require the labels. It means that it does not really matter which images we give to the generative models, it will be able to generate uh, similar images by its own, and that's being used very extensively in the gaming industry. Because as if you are playing, say, a game where you're riding a bicycle or a motor car and it passes through the city, then the graphics which is being created of the city, which gives you a very realistic feel as if you're driving through the city, those graphics are getting generated by the unsupervised models, by the generative models. So we feed into the system the different types of images of the street, and then after that it is able to generate the images by itself. So these are the main uses of the um unsupervised learning models. Now what we will see is that we have another data set, the iris data set. On that, we will first run classification because we have the information available about the y level. Then we will not use the y levels and we'll just run clustering on that. And we will see that without having the information about the y levels, or without having the information about uh, the actual values, if we just run the clustering, how close do we reach? It is like I was giving the example earlier that suppose if we are walking into a forest and there are plenty of flowers there, all of us not being really an experts in botany, we would be able to identify the flowers and say that now we are seeing that there are three types of flowers or five types of different flowers, but we would not know the name because we don't have a background in botany. We may not know the names of those, but based on our experience and based on the similarity between those flowers, we can always say that there appears to be five different types of flowers in the forest or in the garden that we have entered into. So our eyes are able to distinguish between a rose flower and a hibiscus and a marigold. We may not be actually knowing the names, but just by observing those, we are able to distinguish that there are five different types of things available or three different types of things available. Similarly, by running the clustering algorithm, we should be able to distinguish that there are three different clusters or three distinct clusters available in the data set. I may not be able to know the names. So when we work with the iris data set, what we have in the data set is the information about three different varieties of the iris flower, which are called Setosa, versicolor, and virginica. So first we'll work with the label data where we have been told in uh, the data set that which flower is of which type. And then we will work with the clustering and we will assume as if no, that information was not available. So we don't expose that information to our algorithm and then say that can we really cluster this into uh, three different categories, and we will see that whether without that manual labeling, are we approaching the same kind of performance or not? Because if we are able to do that, then it's a wonderful thing to do because without having the information about what kind of flowers they were, we were still able to find out the pattern and say that there are three different types of flower. I may not know the name, but at least even without having the labels, are we able to really find out that there are three types of flowers as it was there in the original data set? So first we will run with classification on the iris data set. So we import the libraries. I think this one has to come first. Then we get the data set. We are seeing that we have 150 records and each one has four different attributes. So the X is having four different attributes and Y is having just the names. Then we put that into data frame. We see that the values are given as 0, 1, 2. And what do these 0, 1, 2 represent? We can see that in the target names. The target values are given as 0, 1, 2, and they correspond to Setosa, versicolor, and virginica. So if it is 0, it means that it is belonging to the Setosa type of flower. If it is 1, then versicolor. If it is 2, then it is virginica. Now, what we have to do is to find out a classification algorithm where we say that based on the information that we have available, which is, let's see what is there in X. So if you say here iris dot feature name, so the features we have been given are these four features. It is the length of the sepal, width of the sepal, length of the petal, and width of the petal. So these are the two main components in any flower, the colorful part is your petal, and the green part, which is just below the petals, is called this sepal. So if we have the length and width, can we distinguish, can we write an algorithm that based on the combination of the sepal width and length and petal width and length, can we say that the flower actually belongs to one of these three subspecies, which is Setosa, versicolor, and virginica? This is what the exercise that we will be doing. But first we'll run with classification, because I also have the Y data available here. So we run the train test split. Then we'll run one of these algorithms, maybe STD classifier, and then we get the prediction. We have a small data set, so it's running actually very fast. And then we get the accuracy score, which is 86%. It means that now if I have the information about the sepal length and width and uh, petal length and width, then I will be able to categorize the flower into either of the three different categories with 87% accuracy. That's what we have now got from the classification algorithm. Now we will run the clustering algorithm and say that without knowing or without having any information about what type of flowers they are, can we really find out that these are uh, this is what the pattern in the flower is or there are three different types of flower or three different clusters of flower? Can we really find out? So we'll go to the clustering worksheet and run the same exercise, but without knowing what the label is. So we'll just work with only X, dataset X. So this one was the mole dataset. We'll go and take the iris dataset here. So in this worksheet, now we are getting the iris data. And we'll work with only Y. We'll work with only X. So right now we don't even know about Y. So I am putting that data into X iris. Okay, so I'm printing even Y iris. So I'll not do that. So we have the data in X iris, and here we have saw that there were 4 different fields available, and I don't have any right now. We are not even reading the Y data. So I have only information about the flower. I don't have information about their categories. So Y we will ignore anyway. And then we will run the clustering exercise with X iris. So having done this, we can do the analysis of that. As you can see that on the iris data set, this is the inertia values as we create 2 or 3 or 4 different clusters out of that data set. Then we can get the silhouette score for the iris data set. We can plot this. And as we plot this, we see that the elbow formation is happening at 3. So possibly 3 is the best number of cluster to have. Then we'll plot the, now as I was mentioning to you, that it is often that you will get an elbow formation in the, when you plot the inertia, but you may not get the same kind of formation as you got earlier in the silhouette score. So here it is just going on falling and falling, and therefore we'll see the silhouette plot. And so if you run the silhouette plot here, We get this, and then we have to determine that whether it should be. Okay, so here it is actually plotting the previous one itself. I'll have to change the. Okay, so here we need to draw this with X iris. It is actually drawn on the mall dataset itself. Okay, so here we have the data available for the iris dataset. So we see that 2 is okay, reasonably well, but now 3 is um symmetrical, more or less. Yes, the 0 has larger numbers, and it is meeting the second criteria. Everything is beyond this vertical line. It is meeting the third criteria because there is nothing in the negative territory. 4 is not coming that well because symmetricity is not that perfect. And same thing starts happening with the rest of these. So even after seeing the Silhouette score, 3 appears to be the best one. The 2 is actually, anyway, if you have to choose between 2 and 3, we'll go for the larger number. So here also we see that it is the 3 different categories, although you could still argue that maybe 2 is also a good number, but the symmetricity here is actually category 0 is almost double that of category 1. So on the visual inspection of the Silhouette score and the visual inspection of the inertia graph, here also we come to the conclusion that maybe dividing this data set into 3 different clusters would be the best. Then we run this with 3 different clusters. And here we will run this with X iris. So we are now doing 3 clusters out of X iris data set, and we'll combine that, not the mall data set, but here we have X iris only. So X iris. We'll concatenate the X iris with the results that we get, and then let's see the data set first. So we see that this is how the clustering has been done. Certain flowers has been categorized into cluster 1, certain flowers into cluster 2, certain flowers into cluster 0. Now we have to see that whether they are really corresponding to our original classification. When I had the Y values available, it means that somebody had manually seen those flowers and said that, okay, this flower is Setosa, this flower is Virginica. We did not have the luxury of doing that, so we have done the clustering. Just some random value has been given to the clusters. We know that there are 3 different clusters, but the naming of the cluster may not be, or the numbering of the cluster may not be the same as we have in the original data set. So if we can put that also alongside here, then we will see that what is the cluster ID given by our clustering algorithm and what was the classification which was available to us from the manual labeling. So what we'll do is that in this one, we'll also include, or we'll also put the labels that we had available from the manual labeling. So we'll concatenate this data set with what we have is Y. So Y iris, just let me check if we have prepared Y iris or not, whether that is initialized or not. So X iris we had done, Y iris we had not done. Okay, so that we'll do here. So Y iris was not initialized, so we'll put So now we have in the same data set all the observations and all the features. Then we have the information about the cluster ID that we had given and the labeling which was done by the manual uh, inspection. So the labels is what was given to us originally. We did the clustering without knowing what these flowers are or what are the different types of flowers we have. And then we had put some cluster ID. Now these cluster IDs has been given just 0, 1 and 2. And then we will now filter out and see that how do these levels really compare. So if you see this data set about the cluster ID 0, we see that against these zeros, we have some as 1, some as 2, but none as 0. So looks like that whatever we have given as 0 is either belongs to, it should either is either level 0 or level 2. We'll see that. If we are seeing for cluster 1, then most of the ones are actually zeros here. It means that maybe whatever we are calling as 1, it's actually 0 in the manual labeling. And as I was mentioning that the cluster ID would be given, we are just given some ID of 0, 1, 2. So it looks like that if we change our cluster ID from 1 to 0, then all of them will match. It will be a good match. And then if we see here 2, then mostly 2s are 2. So 2 is fine. So if we interchange our cluster ID from 0 to 1 and 1 to 0, then I think we have also got a very good, mapping. It means that whatever was manually labeled as Setosa, and if we name our uh, flower name to Setosa, so let's do that here. Let's give a name to these labels. So we'll give the name to these labels. So we'll say here DF or we already have the code here. We'll just run with that one. We'll choose these label names as, so 0 was Setosa there. And then we'll just refer to these names. So it was 0 was Setosa, second was versicolor, and third was virginica. So we are seeing that the label 2 is, we need to interchange these two when we are giving our names. So it is versicolor, Setosa, and third one is virginica. And we'll attach Y also here now itself. Good. So now we have got a data frame which contains the features, the labels, and now we have given the name to the labels. And if we just want to see this data, so here we have the labels, here we have the cluster. Okay, so in the concatenate, here we have only the labels. We'll also put here y-iris. So rather than having this, let's put here A. So I have the labels, and I think you should give me. So y-iris is not defined, so we'll define that here maybe. We have, yeah. Okay, so I think now it should run. So in the idea was to get the all the labels, the cluster ID that we have given, and the cluster ID that we have the classification which was available from the manual operation. I think we should get that now. So here, what's the problem now? X iris A and Y iris. So here, it should be not A, it should be Y. Because that Y contains the labels here. Yeah. Now if we see our data frame, it is now showing me the, sorry, we have given labels here. We'll just change the name as cluster here. So when we are getting the LM labels, we are calling that as cluster, so that we have a distinction between so our cluster name, now those names we have given here, this is what we have got from clustering, and this is what we had got from the labeling. So as you can see now, as we have seen that the labeling 0 was setosa earlier also, and 2 was virginica, and 3 was versicolor, and 3 was virginica. So now we will see them one by one and see that how many are actually matching. So if you say DF cluster is equal to labels, yeah. So now we see that most of the here is actually Virginica in our manual classification. So we can see that there are only few cases where what was manually classified as Virginica is actually versicolor in our classification. This one is our classification. So otherwise, mostly the mapping is correct. It means that we are able to identify most of these correctly. If we go to what was um, versicolor in the manual classification and how many we have been able to identify as versicolor, majority of them, just by clustering, we are able to identify correctly. As you can see that the same mapping we have been able to arrive at. And we will also check for Setosa. So we will check for Setosa, and we see that here also, in most of the cases, or rather in this case, everything we have been able to identify correctly. So that's the power of clustering that we see here, that without having known about the manual labels that we had created, we are able to group these flowers based on just the information available about the petal length, petal width, and sepal length and sepal width. We have done some classification. And then we can go to, with that classification, to the botanists and say that if you are giving this data to me, it looks like there are three different types of flowers. And I can number these flowers as 0, 1, 2. And then the botanist can help us identify that, okay, if this is the, whatever you are labeling, or the cluster uh, ID that you are giving 0, that cluster ID 0 is actually the versicolor flower. And cluster ID 1 that you are giving is actually Setosa flower. And then we are able to see that the classification that we have without knowing about the labels is coming very close to what we have in the uh, clustering. So that's the power of clustering. That's the power of machine learning. That even if I don't have the information about the Y available, or the target name available, or the label name available, we are still able to classify them into groups. Now, in some other cases, given the information, say in chemistry, we work or we learn the periodic table, and that periodic table was derived more than 100 years back by different scientists or researchers. But now, with this kind of clustering, we have actually been, or the researchers in machine learning have been actually able to recreate the periodic table by just feeding the data about different types of molecules or different types of elements. So the system would be able to say that with all this data that we have available, I see that there are maybe 50 or 100 different types of elements available in the universe. It may not give the exact name that we are using, that whether it is oxygen or hydrogen or titanium or whatever, but it will be able to say that there are distinct 100 different types of elements in the world. Now that is also very powerful, and after that we can go and give a name to that. So the same process that we have done with a very small database of 150 records, where we saw that the classification process is telling me that there are three distinct types of flowers available in this data set, and we are able to segregate these flowers into cluster ID 0, cluster ID 1, and cluster ID 2. We may not be knowing the names of that, and then we have done the verification with the manually given labels, and we see that names are coming, one on one. It's matching actually very well. Setosa, it is able to match absolutely correctly. And for the Virginica and the versicolor, there is some misclassification, but there is some misclassification even with the classification algorithm, because our accuracy was only 86%. So we could also compute the uh, accuracy here, and then we we may find that it's not very different compared to whatever we have got in the classification exercise. So what we have learned over the past three sessions is about the unsupervised learning. And one of the key methods of unsupervised learning, which is called clustering. So we have talked about the K-means clustering. Tomorrow we'll talk about the agglomerative clustering or the hierarchical clustering, another way of finding out, what are the different ways that we can do the clustering. Any questions? Fine. So tomorrow we'll work with agglomerative clustering, and then after that we'll go into the PCA and TSNE, and then starting Friday we will go into deep learning, which is also very interesting aspect that we'll go into. So supervised learning and unsupervised learning, the classical algorithms we will have covered. Then starting Friday we'll go into deep learning. So if there are no further questions, then we'll end the session today, and then we'll meet again tomorrow morning.